Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Thursday, April 10th, 2025. I'm Dr. Yamonja Smalls, Director of Professional Development for the Maryland Department of Health's Developmental Disabilities Administration. We welcome you to today's Rate Review Advisory Group meeting. Just a reminder, if you're not speaking, to mute your mics. Before beginning, we'd also like to ensure civility for all of our meetings. The free expression of diverse viewpoints is a fundamental value of our group. This freedom carries a responsibility to engage respectfully, which means treating one another with dignity and in respect and good faith. Uncivil behavior, disruptive actions, abusive language, threats, or harassment will not be tolerated and may result in removal from the meeting. Thank you for helping to keep this productive and comfortable for everyone. All participants are in listen-only mode. There are two options to hear the webinar by computer and phone. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube and the DDA website. Today's PowerPoint will be available for you to download from the DDA website and is available to you to download in the materials section. If you're an attendee, please place your questions in the question box, which is a small icon with a question mark above it. During the public comment section of today's presentation, the DDA team will respond to questions posted and provide an opportunity for you to also ask your questions directly. And now I'd like to introduce you to Deputy Secretary Marlena Hutchinson to begin today's meeting. Good afternoon, Deputy Secretary.
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for April's Rate Review Advisory Group meeting. We're looking forward, as always, to some ongoing and great discussions today around the supported employment services. Next slide. Today's agenda will include that continued conversation around employment services and follow-along supports. We will also cover the process for accessing follow-along supports, review the current rate methodology, and analyze data collected from the State Employment Leadership Network, also known as SELM, the job and its Job Coach app. Additionally, we will share updates regarding the general ledger template as well, and then we'll outline our next steps. Next slide. Now I'll turn it over to Robert.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So members were sent an email with the meeting minutes on April 4th. I would now like to make a motion to approve.
Quick question about the minutes real quick. In the very first section, employment services, we had the healthy discussion about follow along. It references the examples that Rhonda was responding to that we were discussing. I don't believe those are the ones that you put on the whiteboard, Steve. I think they were kind of subsequent thoughts to those examples. Would there be value including those examples in the minutes so we can follow them from the starting point out?
We can go back and take a look at that.
Thank you.
Get a motion to approve with the all in favor? Thank you. Next slide. Now turning it over to Antoine Williams, Jr., our Director of Programs.
So at this point in our discussion, we're going to have a really good conversation about the path to employment services, how an individual accesses those follow-along supports. We'll look at how DDA determines assessed need, and then we'll look at some of the rate methodology, and then last but not least, that data, that SELN, the job coach data that was provided. And so we'll start with this first slide, which provides an overview for the path to accessing follow-along supports for a participant. So as you see here, it all starts with the person-centered plan. The CCS develops a person-centered plan that requests the follow-along supports. After that plan is developed with the participant, it's submitted to the DDA regional office so that the regional office can review for assessed need. At times during that review, additional information is needed. And so the regional office will submit what's called a clarification request to get that additional information. We do want to highlight that as we talked about at the last meeting, that we understand that there are some challenges with the amount of time that it takes to submit that person-centered plan. And so DDA has acknowledged that, and moving forward, we will expedite the review for when someone is requesting follow along or any type of employment support so that they don't lose their employment. And so that's something that we're working on doing. And then, of course, once those clarifications are met and DDA has the information that they need, then a decision will be made. That decision will to move forward with the requested services that'll be sent to the provider, and then the supports can be followed. Any questions about the current process?
So a couple questions. Thanks for sharing that. So you say they look at what the need is. Is there a fidelity tool they use? What is the tool that they use? Is there any inter-rater reliability? Because I know that's one of the things we've heard is that some people within one region and different regions look at different things. Do you use any sort of fidelity tool?
That's a great question. So we are in the process of developing a person-centered plan checklist that is standard across the regions, and that will be rolling out very soon. Our regional office plan reviewers also use the authorization and billing guide that helps them make sure that we're following what's in the waiver and what we've put in policy. And we're continuing to look at other things that we can do to help improve our inter-rater reliability.
So one of the issues that I heard from a number of providers is that the skill of the CCS to be able to articulate it in a way, because we don't see it after we have our meeting and give them the information. So the transition from provider request to and the PCP meeting to into the CCS's hand and then into the state's hand is there seems to be some missing skill in many cases to articulate it in a way that's consistent with maybe the way that we put the request in and so on. And so I think that's one of the barriers.
Yeah, that is something that's been brought to our attention for some time. One of the things that we learned in our process mapping exercises is the need to not only train regional offices, but train our CCS. And so we'll be in the process of developing some training and actually vetting that through our Waiver Advisory Council as well, so that we can have a broad array of feedback to incorporate into our training. Lots of training needed across the board.
So just to, as I'm trying to close this loop, so the PCP checklist, when are you thinking that will be rolled out, and then will that be shared with other people?
Absolutely. So we are looking to have that come out very, very soon. I would say probably within the next month or so.
Okay.
That should be launched.
And then will that be shared with everybody so they know? I mean, I don't want people to fill in the blank.
Absolutely. No,
But it'll be shared broadly?
So the goal is really so that the CCSs understand the same thing that the regional office is looking at when we're reviewing plans.
Okay. So you'll share that like in a monthly DDA call or something?
We're not sure exactly what format we'll share it, but it will be shared.
Okay. And then a second question, you said you're looking at expediting. Can you be a little bit more specific about, like, by following the processes that's already in the system that aren't being met right now, or what are you talking about specifically?
So our goal is to get to the place where within 5 days of it being submitted, it's back with the CCS.
That's the SLA that will be established.
Yeah. And some regions, Eastern and Western are already there. And so we'll be working higher volume regions to streamline processes to help them get there as well. We understand the importance of, just based on feedback we received from folks and the need to stop over authorizing services, that we need to have a streamlined process for follow along and onboard. So,
Yeah, I think that is it's a really big concern for mine, because with the number of people that are in employment, and employment does have such a variant of service, is the amount of time it takes to work with a CCS agency to get the plan amended. I mean, we amend no plans anymore because we can't even get the regular plans through. So we have to request over authorization because you cannot count on that. One of my favorite stories is when Sandy Atkins worked at the Southern Region office and somebody would get a job, I'd call and I'd say, Sandy, I need job coaching money really quickly. And his wife was the one who signed Lois Mazzaros's signature on grants, and so I could get Sandy to get his wife to sign Lois's signature real quick so we could get job coaching in there really quick. Otherwise, I didn't have the money to do it, and it doesn't happen. So we have to over authorize until the system runs smooth enough for us to do amendments in an expedient way.
Yeah.
Because at this point, it can be 3 to 6 months to even get a regular PCP through. An amendment would be a low priority. So I think stopping over authorization before you have that other system in place would be incredibly hurtful to the employment process.
So that's why we've allowed it to continue, because
Okay.
we know we have to look at those systems, those processes, and have this conversation with all of the parties who are involved, and rebuild trust in that process.
Can I ask a question? I have similar concerns, not just for employment, but we are seeing definitely a tightening of and I prefer not refer to it as over authorization, I refer to it as flexible authorization, because you can't overuse the service. It just provides it was a way to provide flexibility. But I mean, we are, I know you said you're continuing it, but we are definitely hearing from providers that they're seeing a tightening of, they're being told they can't do it anymore. They have to back out those hours. And it's really, to Karen's point, really worrisome about what it will mean for just all of Meaningful Day supports.
Yeah, I mean, there's some caveats, and I believe we had the conversation in the past, Laura, related to that, when it comes to, especially when folks are choosing employment as a goal, or, many or numerous cycles, they're applying extra scrutiny there. But if someone has employment services as a goal and it's first time, maybe second time, then they're going to allow the over authorization of ongoing and follow along supports to streamline that process to give that extra flexibility. But in some of the conversations we've had, the CMS is really to address the over authorization of services, which lead to inflated budgets and things like that. Makes it very difficult to try to budget moving forward to understand exactly what resources we have available, and which would dictate the number of slots that we're able to fund.
But you track utilization. You
Yeah.
track
We do track
utilization, so
utilization.
you consider that when you're looking.
We do track utilization, that's right.
Utilization and expenditures and trend based on that, and our projections based on that. CMS is also concerned about the variance when you have plus or minus 10% of utilization. So by way of our annual 372 report, which is our financial report due to CMS December 31st of every year, we have to explain those variances.
Because they're assuming that the folks aren't getting the supports they need.
Oh,
So
okay.
like if you have a $200,000 budget, 50,000 of it is over authorized, you're spending about 140. They look at those deltas. They want to make sure that, people are getting the services that they need, that states and or other organizations aren't um, not providing or allowing those services to be provided for cost savings measures or anything else. But they look plus and minus.
Are you worried about that scrutiny? I mean, this is the first time I've ever heard.
Yeah, we haven't
I mean,
heard that.
it seems reasonable.
That's how waiver programs operate. We are worried about that scrutiny. It's something that we should have been explaining the entire time, especially now with this federal platform. So yeah, we definitely are concerned about that. But
I mean, that changes the larger picture of flexibility.
Yeah.
Because this is what this was all based on from the very beginning of the whole development of the system, was that no matter what you requested, you could still only bill for X number of units or hours. You could never overbill. And so that gave people just this incredible flexibility for what services they wanted that week, that month, or when that opportunity came within 24 hours and they wanted to jump on
You
it.
didn't need to have a Sandy at the.
No,
Yeah.
you could just do it. And so if the regional offices by chance are aware of this, that's probably why we're feeling what we're feeling as providers, because every PCP is being looked at now. You can't, nope, you need to back that down to this many hours, back that down to this many hours. It's like, where's this coming from? We've always been able to develop a plan. And if you're overlapping res with a meaningful day service, it's even more critical in terms of those daytime hours. So
I'm not certain if so I don't want to put a statement out here that the regional offices have at the forefront of their minds that we have to explain that variance, right, when they're reviewing plans. What I'm saying is CMS definitely makes the state explain those variances. And historically, we have, in other programs, said, well, this is about participant choice. And so if participants had these services approved, but they elected not to use them, this is about participant choice. It's a different CMS now. And it's a completely different federal platform, and we have to take it, into consideration. So I'm not saying that as the regional offices are reviewing plans, they're, the 372 report. They don't even.
right, they must
deal
have an
with that.
inkling of something there, because it wasn't happening at all, and now it is really happening. So something shifted for somebody somewhere, and I think for the end user, the person and their team, they're not understanding why flexibility is now decreasing. Like
Well, these are things that we'll definitely work together to get through. But I am, to answer Karen's question, I am concerned. It's a new CMS, it's a different federal platform, and those explanations that we provided in the past, we can't say that we've always done it this way, or so just for everybody's situational awareness.
I'm wondering then, because it's just the entire paradigm of the way the intention of how it's written changes. So I'm wondering if there is something, and this is, it's bigger conversation than this, but just as an idea, that it's written in the PCP, and if the PCP has been approved, that you don't have to actually put them into LTSS until there's a switch to turn on. They got a job now, let's turn the follow along on or something, without having to go through the entire amendment to the PCP process, because it's already in the PCP, but you fund it in stages. If there was an efficient way to be able to turn pieces on that is not having to do an entire amendment for people. Because what we've done is we are using the PCP and the annual budget and the authorizations as our safety net because of the system. And so if you were to remove the if you were to remove the risk pool, let's say, the risk pool of authorized services, is there an efficient way to not put them in until they're needed, and when they're needed, slip it on, but not have to go through an entire PCP amendment? Because it's in the PCP, but it just might be funded in phases.
I think,
Definitely.
I mean,
Yeah.
what was said to us a million years ago, which was kind of laughable, was, oh, well, you'll just put it in and the regional offices will press the button and that'll be it. The change will happen like that. And we knew that that wasn't gonna really come to fruition. So, but with the passage of the community rule, you have to give people flexibility, you know? So I think, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think this is a great way to do it. I just really wholeheartedly embrace the concept that we can't get rid of the only thing that creates that flexibility before there is something to an alternative way to do it. Because otherwise you leave people, as we've said to you, you know, you can't drag people out of their home, or you shouldn't drag people out of their home. And providers are almost being put in that position. And it's like, well, somebody says they don't want to leave or they don't want to do X. And it's like, well, it's not your plan. So, you know, too bad. What do? You know?
It's great feedback we can take that.
Just gave you another week's worth of work.
More than that.
So is there any other
Good friends are
questions
cool.
before we move on? All right, so we'll go to the next slide then. So next slide, please. So in this slide, this discusses the actual going through the process of identifying that assessed need. DDA is really looking at two things. Number one, as we know, per our waiver authority, we are funder of last resort. So we're making sure that it's documented in the person-centered plan that the participant has explored other funding sources for these services, and that they have received some type of jobs stabilization, such as through doors or through some other service. And then the second thing is that for follow-along supports, an individual must already have employment, and that employment must meet the criteria of competitive integrated employment. So we have a competitive integrated checklist that kind of walks through what those requirements are. In summary, that means that the person is getting a competitive wage that's above minimum, or that exceeds minimum wage, that it is not subject to any time studies unless the time studies apply to everyone, those with and without disabilities, that it's not part of a segregated or implied group, that the job is not solely intended for a person with a disability, that it's integrated and meets the community settings rule, and last but not least, that it has similar opportunities for advancement and benefits as other employees with similar job descriptions. And so those are kind of the two main needs that we're making sure are assessed before we approve the service.
Antoine, quick question. Some of these they feel tangible, empirical, and observable. Others of them don't. And so I tried to click on the competitive integrated checklist to see if that would give you some guidance, and it came back with a bad link. Particularly as to number 4 and number 6. Here's I'm just sort of curious, how do we demonstrate that?
That is a
I
really.
mean, we can take the word of the employer because we're in there sopping the beachheads and saying, look, you know, this is Jonathan, he's got skills and he wants to compete with the workforce, blah, blah, blah. Employers not infrequently say 2 thumbs up, and he's got every opportunity. Is that good enough? Or is it not?
There are job descriptions when these were created. These are actually federal language. That there were in many job descriptions that in jobs that were made for people with disabilities, specifically Ability One or other set-aside programs, where it says in it, this is a dead-end job.
I'm asking how we affirmatively demonstrate, not by process of eliminating stupid job descriptions from 1974. But
I think that that's a good question. Currently, the regional office, when they look at the checklist and they and to Karen's point, we usually ask for a summary of the job. I do believe that there is some subjectivity into that. So that's something that we can look a little bit more closer to. But really, it's the CCS and the providers documenting and attesting that this is what that they're meeting these.
And I love the idea of an attestation, because that makes a lot of sense, but if it gets caught in some sort of a vortex, because it's hard to put your fingers around those two things particularly. Meantime, Jonathan is waiting to get started and move into his competitive employment. We don't want to get hung up on something.
Sounds like an opportunity to learn or hear about some of the best practices that you all have encountered or you're aware of that we can take into consideration.
So how have any of you identified that the person is meeting that criteria?
I mean, we end up getting a bit stuck. That's a little unfair, because most employers we work with who are willing to work with Jonathan, they're ready to go. And let's look at this glass half full. But there's nothing in writing necessarily that says Jonathan is absolutely, in the pool for promotion, merit-based increases, and et cetera, et cetera. Neither do, I don't know if you guys do, but neither do we ask the VP of Human Resources to attest to. So it ends up being, we believe in this particular situation and the support Jonathan will get from his employer, et cetera, but it doesn't specifically, so I'm a pragmatist.
May I interject just a little bit?
Yeah,
I
please.
believe that what the checklist is kind of asking for, kind of like Ms. Lee stated, was kind of this. So if I went and was a bagger at a grocery store and Jonathan was a bagger at a grocery store, we both, because bagger at the grocery store has potential to become a cashier or become, so just within the job itself, there is implied to move up.
Which is
Because I
great.
was a bagger.
If y'all are willing to say, the
Yeah.
implied.
So it's implied, I
implication,
think, in the position. But if the job that is being presented in the PCP, so in the PCP it'll say Jonathan is a bagger at Food Lion, and
Jonathan
so
would never take that.
yeah. Or let's say Stephanie is a bagger at Food Lion,
Better than that.
and I didn't last long as a bagger at Food Lion at the grocery store either. But it's implied that's a job that anyone with or without disabilities would take. So that's what we're looking for, not necessarily. And so in that job, it is implied that there is room to move up at Food Lion or whatever the case may be. We're not looking for, and the reviewers are, but that needs to just be presented in the PCP. So it's not the same as Stephanie is doing piecework at Goodwill. So would anybody do piecework? And she's being paid per piece. That would throw up a red flag. That's not meeting CIA.
100%.
So you see what I'm saying? So we're not looking for, the reviewers are not looking for that much.
That's the sentence I want to hear.
That you're saying,
That's the
but
sentence I
it's
want to hear.
implied in the position. So if the PCP clearly says that Stephanie is working at Harris Teeter and she's a bagger, and she has the opportunity to interact with other people and has, and is supervised by the same supervisor that's supervising everybody else, it is implied in that she's at a community location in her job. It is implied that there is room for growth.
But to your point, last week Antoine got a chance to meet Sarah, whose job it is at Zinnia to cut the flowers and put them on the tables. There's nobody else at Zinnia who does that.
Right.
She's the only person who does that. And the job was customized for her. And my guess is there's probably not a job description. Like, that's her job. That's what she does. So if the reviewers ever come back and say, we need to know that Sarah has opportunity to move up, well, she's the only person who puts the flowers on the tables at Zinnia and is the only, because it's a
And there's not a
customized job.
senior flower placer.
That's right.
So
So
there's.
the CCS would clearly write in the plan that this is a customized position We're clearly writing the plan that this
Yeah.
job was customized for her, but she's being paid above minimum wage or above for this position. She has opportunity to interact with others.
So those are the
And
real,
trading,
the real
those are the
things.
things.
Those are the real
Correct.
things.
And that was my differentiation, and I don't want to get us into the rabbit hole
Right.
any more deeply than I already have, but there are tangible,
Do
quantifiable.
we need the other ones?
1 through 3 is good to go.
Mhm.
4 and 6 make me nervous, not because what you just framed really well isn't in fact generally the case, but if somebody on the back end is reviewing this stuff, I don't want to get caught in, well, I thought I heard that it was implied that if it's a integrated job, Stephanie has an opportunity to move on up, et cetera. It's just this distinction between the nebulous, because we're all in the same boat here, and we all think the same thing, as generally speaking. But I don't know who's reviewing Stephanie's plan and how they're going to conclude that, yes, this meets those 6 criteria.
Especially when it's customized,
Correct.
because oftentimes people, even with more profound disabilities, jobs are customized, and that's how they're successful.
So,
And so, yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I think part of what we were hoping to come out of this is this exact conversation. Improving the process so that both sides have an understanding of this is what they're looking at, and this is the kinds of information you need to document. So I think what we can take away from this is we need to work on providing some additional guidance about the type of documentation that is going to be reviewed and expected to be there. Helps everybody.
Is there a formal CIE policy? I know there's been discussion, but I'm sorry. Were you
Yes,
gonna-
there is.
Okay, because I know I've gotten questions about whether waiting on a final version, is that?
No, the what that is speaking to is that previous administration was working with a vendor to try to maybe see if I can't think of what the job enclaves, but that's an old word.
Right,
What's the
you
new
mean
word?
under contract
Under
work?
the contract workers
Very
would meet the
Right.
CIE definition. And as it kind of stands now, per our CIE policy, and policies that they do not. But we were looking at it, and it has been sent to our federal program to look at it as and for leadership to look at to see if what they're asking can do. So we do have a current CIE policy though that we are following.
Okay, but you're saying now that you all have determined that anybody.
We
working
didn't
on
determine
contract-
anything. I've just sent it to be looked at.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, her request. We haven't determined anything.
I want to make certain we have enough time for all the agenda items. So are we okay if we move on?
I want to add two quick things. You said that people can't use follow along until they have a job.
That's correct.
Can they get authorized for it before they have a job?
So, no, and that's why, to Robert's point
Mhm.
earlier, and I think even when I was with you all the other day, I asked your employment services department if we could get to a place where a revision to the PCP to add the follow along support is done in 5 days. Will that close the bridge? And they seem to think that
From the 5 days from our ask
yes, from your
to being
ask
in the
to you
system.
get to it being in the system. That's the goal.
Yeah,
to
but
get to.
what I'm hearing is our cylinders aren't firing that way.
No. So that's why currently,
Yeah.
that should,
We get-
that's what
Okay.
Robert was
Okay,
speaking
yeah.
to about
Okay.
older authorization, in
Currently we
particular
are.
when it comes to follow along supports. We understand that we're not there yet. But when we get to that place, that would be the goal, would be that
That would be the SLA.
that would be the SLA, yes.
For the
that-
for DDA.
That the person has to have employment first. And our promise is that when you request that within 5 days, you have it, if all the information is there. Any other? Go ahead.
Also, in follow along with that being said, if the person is working with the job code or the like doors, whatever, you can time it.
Doors
You
who
can
doesn't
work-
have any money and
Doors or whoever the provider was that
They
found
are
the
not your
job and
federal
did job development,
reimbursed.
you can time it
It's not doesn't
so that you give it enough time in the plan.
So,
Sorry, Chris had a comment.
Oh, just a real quick question about the first bullet point. We talk about the documentation, that all the resources must have been explored and before requesting DD funding. Has that changed? What does that look like? Do we have a formal policy and are we seeing plans come back because the CCS has not maybe translated the process well?
yeah, so usually if they just put in there that they've checked with doors or they have some type of job stabilization that they've done, then that will satisfy that requirement.
There's nothing official back from doors we have to have. That.
No, there's not like a specific
It's always
document.
been that these guys have been there forever. In reference to, you gotta go through, you make sure everything's extinguished.
Well, we've been down that road of requiring a letter every single time, and it did not go well.
I just wanna make sure.
Yeah,
Back
yeah,
that
yeah,
way. That's-
No,
that was my
no,
concern.
no, this is not like a new policy. This is,
And
Gotcha.
the goal is not to do things harder.
that's correct.
It's to do it smarter and streamlined, and much more objectively.
Because that has really been the challenge, and that's why the checklist will be so helpful, so that it takes away some of that subjectivity that can hold up plans.
As a point of reference for you, as you turn in your next amendment, you might want to find out from people from CMS if they've been told to not pass anything through that says competitive integrated employment. Despite the fact that that's what's in WIOA, that is not, currently the Trump administration is wiping that out from all presentations, and it can only now say employment. So you might just want to check if it's hit CMS yet. It might not have hit CMS yet. It's definitely at labor and it's in education, but I don't know if it's hit CMS yet.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So if people, because I'm sure I'm gonna get this question, so you don't want people to put follow along in their plan until they have the job? Is that what you're saying?
No, so the current state is, if someone chooses that as a goal, that at the same time, we're allowing them to also do the over authorization for follow along and for ongoing job settings.
But you're saying in
But
the
they can't-
future,
But
you
they
want
can't
to.
access it until they have.
Yeah,
it,
of course.
Right, so.
So people can still request it. Okay, I
Yes.
was just trying to follow if it's in 5 days, is that you're just thinking down the road?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the future.
The 5-day SLA is down the road.
Yeah.
Once the system is
Yeah.
operating like it should.
All right, so we can move to the next slide. And so now we're going to pass it over to Robert, and he's going to talk about the rate methodology.
Yeah, thank you, Antoine. Good afternoon again, everyone. We got into some of the exciting dialogue that I'm hoping that we continue once we get past this slide. So we've discussed how follow-on support services are provided. And now these are kind of the assumptions about follow-along supports in all employment services are being provided on this slide to help you all understand how the rate is informed and also share what rate components are relative to each of these employment services. So we've highlighted follow-along supports with the red border because that's what we're focused on this cycle, but also wanted to share what those components look like for the other services that fall within the employment services service line. And so the main components, obviously everything starts with the BLS wage for the direct service provider. That wage is different for GeoDiff counties as well as for the rest of the state. There are also additional components related to employee-related expenses, facility costs, program support, training, transportation, and general and administration. And then you will also notice that the follow-along supports rate is a monthly rate, and it's shown in the last two columns. Next slide, please. So the next half hour or so, we would like to hear your experience with providing follow-on support services. We've created some questions here to help focus the discussion and comparisons. We really want to know how your experiences compare to the assumptions that you saw in the previous slide with the relevant BRIC components as it relates to follow-on support. So, for example, the follow-along support rate model has a higher wage for DSP. So the BLS wage for follow-on support is the 75th percentile, and it's at the 50th percentile for the rest of employment services. So we're hoping that you can help us understand the type of staff that provide the follow-along support service, as well as what their level of experience is, as well as give us some examples of how the level of experience might differ. So I'd like to pause here to get some feedback from you all related to those questions.
Can I just make one comment? I think that a lot of times the levels were higher at the 50th, 75th, 90th percentile, the higher ones, as a way, sometimes it was related to the expectations of the job, and sometimes it was a way to bring the rate up without, I mean, that was definitely done through different services. So just, I just want to be careful because it may be the case that they have higher, level of expertise needed, but I also think there are times that, I can't swear it was this one, but certainly there are services where that percentile was raised as a lever to get.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, some were based on policy decision.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, Robert, without forcing me to do the math here, what is baked into that milestone per the number of hours? I mean, I could sit and figure it out if you wanted, but do you know the number of hours that are baked into that?
Yeah, so for the follow-along support, it assumes 2 1-hour sessions per month, as well as 3 hours of indirect support for each one of those hours. So a total of 8 hours per month.
Mhm.
Just looking, maybe we can jump back to slide 11. I just don't have it printed on the screen, looking at it. So just, kind of looking at the BLS wage for follow-along supports versus the other services, is that kind of in alignment with what you all are seeing, or how you have set the salary?
So it actually turns out to be less than if you broke it down into quarter-hour units, it turns out to be less than the other things. So if you look at the job development, the quarter-hour on rest of state is 27, and the quarter-hour on this is 22. So even though it is 75%, why is that? How can that be?
These this should be, so.
The milestone is 727. 55, and you divide that by 8.
If I can assist with the math, this is Caleb. There's a transportation component in some of those other services that is not present in follow-along supports, and that makes up a significant difference of that rate, that final rate, because follow-along supports transportation is billed separately outside of this rate.
And it doesn't include any transportation for the staff. It's just, that's the direct transportation.
We're following.
Yeah.
So The follow along rate assumes that you're billing separately for transport.
For the person's transportation, but not, there's a lot of staff transportation because they're going from site to site to site. So in any of the transportations, is it all participant transportation, or is it, is the administration transportation, the staff transportation found in like program supports or G&A?
No, I don't, not in G&A. Hey, are you able to look at the model as it pertains to staff transportation?
Yeah, so the calculation for the transportation component was based on hours that the staff spent transporting the person, or that the staff dedicated, that there was staff time required for transportation. So there was, when the model was originally built, and this is a few years back, the model was originally built, there was a question about, the providers were asked, how many hours of transportation is required per month, and we divided that by the number of members that were served and used that to estimate the cost of transportation as the overall component compared to the wage. So it did include, it was, the original calculation did include staff time.
Can I ask another question about what's in there? I know in the past you all have said that there is some level of productivity in the wage number for other services. Is there an assumption that there's productivity in this one as well?
What we've, so there is, and then let me not screw this up because it's been a while since we've had this conversation. So when we look at some of the different cost components and how that wage has been trended forward over time compared to where the BLS states it should be, what we said is we felt that, that delta was more than enough to cover a productivity factor when we were having that conversation. But we also know that once we start to pivot and focus on productivity and putting some kind of factor in there, that it would change some of the hydraulics with the components. So I think, it depends. I'm going to use the default answer that most economists give when asked a question, because it's complicated. I know that wasn't one of the priorities we're focused on this cycle, but I think in the future cycle, when we do circle back and start to focus on productivity again, we can really dig into it.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Okay, when you were talking about the staff travel, obviously the old model Caleb was talking about, staff was doing the transportation for the individual. You're talking about, I'm gonna call it administrative time, it's staff time travel without the individual.
Yes.
So if we've gone in and yanked the entire, if those numbers were both in there and we pulled the entire transportation component, thinking it just represented when we were transporting the individual.
Correct.
We've got that piece missing.
Yeah, that piece is missing.
Well, then, can I ask this question? Thank you, because that was puzzling. To the indirect hours, so there's 3 hours of indirect to 1 hour of direct, essentially in the ratio. Is that really a sort of kitchen sink number of hours that is intended to include the kitchen sink? So while it doesn't include miles, it includes time in my car between supporting different people at different sites. Is that, Caleb, true?
Yes, that's true. We're estimating the cost by estimating the number of hours that the direct service provider spends on the service, and then adding the other costs in as these components. So We assume that the DSP is spending 8 hours a month per client providing these services on average. Any part of time that the DSP is spending on this client in the month.
This is, I guess, Caleb, this is Karen Adams Gilchrist. Just a clarification question. When you're talking about transportation that is included, we don't document, we don't document transportation like when we're out going from place to place. That's not, for us, we don't document that as indirect. We don't, if we're going from place to place to place to place, which is a lot of transportation, we're not documenting that as a part of that 3 hours of indirect. Are you saying that's what we should be doing?
Well, then indirect would have to go much higher.
That's where I'm going.
Well, I feel
Well, that's what I'm
So,
saying, because we don't document that going from place to place and being in the car a lot without anybody. A lot of times in the car without anybody we support, but going from place to place, we're not documenting that as indirect. When we document indirect, it's related directly to a person that we're supporting, but it might not be with them, but maybe we're talking to an employer, maybe we're on the phone with Social Security, I don't know, lots of different things. So you're not saying that time in the car going from place to place should be indirect? You're not saying, is that what you should, okay, just clarification, if that
I
makes
want to
sense.
defer to DDA about how they bill, or how providers should bill for the separate transportation component for follow along support. Since I'm not an expert on that rate, or what the policy and process for that transportation, that separate transportation billing, and what that covers exactly. But the model itself is set up to assume 8 hours, and then we try to account for all these other costs that are in addition to just the wages of the person providing the service. That's the brick model is like, we start with the basic, the kernel is how many hours a staff member spends providing the service, and then we try to cover all these other costs. And in this case, the model does not account for extra costs for transportation. So if that is something, that is the purpose of this discussion, is to try to kind of get to the bottom of how you guys are providing the service versus how we are constructing the model. So if you include sort of that time driving from client to client as part of your indirect hours, and if you include that and it comes out to much more than 8 hours a month, then that's an issue. Or if that's not covered by the separate transportation rate that DDA provides, and the hours are higher than 8 hours overall per month, then that's something we should discuss. But I'm going to turn it over to DDA, and maybe Stephanie or Antoine could talk about the actual transportation rate for follow-along supports, the separate rate.
Can I just insert a quick
Sure.
question to go along with that?
Sure.
I thought the only thing it's been a while since I've looked, so forgive me. I thought what had to be documented was the 2 in-person contacts.
Correct.
And that the assumption was that there was, when we had the discussion, there was indirect time needed, but that you didn't have to document indirect time, that you just documented the 2, and that was the monthly rate, and there were some rate assumptions built in. So I just want to be careful about questions about documenting indirect time.
And we will need to go back and look at the billing guidelines, because it's been a while since I've looked at that as well, before we can confirm it, but it sounds like it's in alignment with what I recall reading for that service. not sure if Karen was just talking about a process unique to her organization.
Well,
Versus,
Robert, let me clarify that. Whenever I was just using it because indirect as the term that was being used here. We document everything. We don't document and put down that it's indirect. We don't do that. But we document for everything that we do. But yeah,
This
we're
is the
not saying,
milestone payment.
right.
yeah, we're not saying this is indirect and this is direct. We're not doing that. But yeah, we do document for absolutely everything. So just to clarify, yeah, we're not putting anything down as direct or indirect.
So I think back to Chris's point, the piece that's missing is the cost and time, which I guess you could say, Laura, that's the productivity piece. That, so I'll give you the story just so we have context here. So for people who don't receive one-on-one supports, they receive the drop-in supports. There generally is like a coordinator level person who oversees that. And so they're like a regional employment coordinator, and they maybe are working with 20 people, and they maybe have 4 job coaches that work with them. And the job coach has a caseload of, let's say, 8 people they work with. And so today they start their day and they might pick up Oscar and bring him to his job to get him set up. And then they would leave and they would drive over to see Sarah at her job and check in and see how she's doing, check in with her employer. And then they might come into the office and write some of their notes up for the day. And then they would go back and, meet with Sheila, who's over at her job, and check in and go back to the office and make a call to the mom to see how are things going with the benefits. Do you need any help with your benefits? I mean, that's kind of their day. This is not for people who are getting direct support, but people who get this follow along support. Is that person is living out of their car, like they're moving in and out, and they're seeing people. They've got a caseload, and maybe one of the people they're working with all of a sudden they got a new supervisor, so they got to be there for 2 weeks straight, and they aren't driving around a lot, but they're doing that. So there's the cost of travel, and then there's the time of travel, which is a productivity piece. And so that's kind of how that position of that follow along generally works, which is different than ongoing, which is when you've got somebody who's getting constant support. So there's a lot of travel and follow along. There's a lot of hey, I'm going to make a quick call to mom to find out if they called Social Security and how long they were on the phone with them for today. And it's very much it is outward facing. So a skill level, they've got to be able to talk to employers. They have to be able to speak with families. They have to be able to document in the PCP process. I would say in our organization, it is supervised by a high level person, but they're entry positions. They're entry level positions because they they're not the job developer, which is a very high level position, and they're not the people doing discovery. That's also a very high level position because the critical thinking needed for it. So to your question about where they are, it's kind of a group together. You've got some high and some entry levels, like you would in a lot of services, right? So you've got a case manager level person, and then you've got a frontline person, and they together work with a group of people. But there's a lot of time that is, I would love to say, like Karen, that every time somebody makes a call to mom to say, did you call Social Security about this? Or they got on the call and were on Social Security for 4 hours, that they were documented all. I'm not so sure they document all their indirect time. I definitely know they document their direct time. Not so sure they document all their indirect time. I would hope that they would, but we're not as focused on that. So I would say on a regular basis, on a daily basis, they are probably spending I would say that they're doing direct support for probably somewhere around 30% of their time, and about 70% of their time is indirect or driving or documenting.
It sounds like if you just were to dissect the rate structure, that perhaps we have too few hours, the combination of direct and indirect, uh, and we need to up those, and we may actually have the hourly rate wrong because we've assumed a higher hourly rate. So um, and I'm not suggesting that the net of that would be a zero-sum game. We don't know the answer to that yet. I'm just suggesting that the levers, it seems like we have them wrong.
Yeah, I would say it's a blended rate. It's a blended.
It's definitely intended to be a
Right.
blended rate. That's the way it was structured.
Right.
Okay.
Is there a place for benefits counseling?
So we've talked about that on the waiver advisory committee about doing that. I will tell you that we just figured out at SEEK that we could actually do it as a part of ongoing if the person, and so that actually might even be our recommendation. So there is definitely a need to have benefits counseling, and Doors will pay for kind of the initial benefits counseling, but what's kind of being discussed as best practice right now is that benefits counseling happens in 3 phases, right? It happens in the first phase where we say, let's take a look at your benefits, and by the way, you can work, it's okay. Then it's the really hardcore stuff where we're really looking at Social Security and we're monitoring it until you are stabilized in your job. And then there's the stuff ongoing you have to do. And that's the piece that why most people end up kicked off the waiver, is because we're not doing step 3. And so we're looking at, is it possible to add that to ongoing? Unless we, can we add it to ongoing? Is that the easiest way, or is it better to have a separate line item? And I actually think we could bolster the definition of ongoing, and that could be something that gets added into ongoing.
Yeah, I think another line that may not,
Right. So that's something we've talked about.
And in the prior conversation, Rhonda commented that the expectation is the benefits counseling would be more aligned with the ongoing than it would be with the follow-on supports.
It's way too intense, and the skill level and the payment to the staff person is way too high. And a lot of people might have to use external people, so they want to use they use ongoing. They might have to use their external somebody else.
The only question I would have is if somebody only needs follow along, but they do need benefits counseling, then does that bring ongoing into their
we bake
plan?
ongoing into every single plan, because knowing it's, again, because we don't have an ability to turn it on, knowing that sometime during the year you're going to get a new supervisor, or not a lot of hours, but we have it for everybody as a part of the risk pool.
Yeah,
So
I think
I don't
that's
know.
where that checklist will come in handy, because we don't get funding for everybody that might just need follow along when we ask for ongoing. If they're like, well, they don't need it right now, and then that's when we have the delay in trying to add it later.
Yeah.
So that's where I think that
You're
so
not
there's
getting
some
ongoing.
individuals we just get follow along, and we've asked
Oh,
for
you
just
haven't been able to get
safety,
ongoing.
like some safety hours, because things like that happen, and they won't fund it.
They should.
I agree.
Different region.
Yeah.
So we're running behind, so we want to make certain that we give everyone time. Before we exit this conversation, any additional comments, conversation?
And just real quick, as we had that conversation, it really came full circle for me. The indirect piece, we've got to figure out, do we have the correct number of hours? And it really, for me, it broke it down. There's indirect for the consumer. And you mentioned, I'm coming back, I'm doing my notes, I'm making that phone call for mom. But then there's the indirect for the program. I'm out building relationships with employers. I'm out, driving from job to job to job. Did we get all of that? And if we didn't, we're not required to document it. How do we then document it and make sure we can get an assessment on, are we picking up all those indirect hours?
Yeah, I like where you're going, Chris. It's interesting. Stephanie actually is going to present a slide with some of the SELN data that gives a little bit of insight into it. Now, recognize when Stephanie talks about it, it's a very small sample. It's not meant to be
My team
representative.
is in it.
Yeah, but I think it helps inform this conversation, because what it shows is the rate setting is done at a fairly high level, aggregate, and it's a blend, but there appear to be potentially a lot more subcategories that could be added to help explain and document what services are being provided.
But I think to Karen's original point, that the transportation competitor cost for the staff side for the indirect for the program has probably gotten yanked
Yeah.
unintentionally. So that administration, I don't think it's in G&A. I don't think it was intended to be in that piece. It was intended to be in transportation. So I think wiping that to zero, we've missed the transportation associated with the indirect for the program. Maybe it needed to be pulled for the indirect for the client.
Yeah.
Steve, can I jump in? I don't want to stretch this out, but I did want to touch base on a very quick point. At some point, I thought I heard someone say that the job coaches maybe serve 20 clients a month. Is there do people have a sense of how many clients? Because that would help inform sort of how much time overall they're spending on these tasks, on these services. Is 20 a reasonable number, or is it higher or lower?
When I said 20, Caleb, a team has 20, and that team might have one kind of high level person, a high level coordinator staff who does the PCP and writes the plans and is the coordinator with the CCS, maybe does all that high level stuff, and the job coaches work underneath them. So there might be 4 job coaches or 3 job coaches that do that support for those 20 people. So I would say, I do know that when these rates were originally calculated, we were looking at, I think 8 is what we were looking at originally, but I don't know, I don't know what iteration that actually happened, but
Okay. Good question. We may need to come up with some kind of structure or metric like that just to help us understand if the assumptions make sense from a caseload perspective.
I will say that this is probably more than any service that we do. This is then different in every organization. We happen to be a very large employment. We support over 250 people working.
Yeah.
And so we've got we have 3 full-time employer outreach people who they're the ones who are working every day to meet employers and going to the chamber meetings and all of that. And not everybody has the infrastructure to do that because they don't provide that level of service. So if you're an organization that's got like 20 people in employment services, you don't have that kind of infrastructure. And so I think that how it gets implemented, yes, there might be a function for who talks to employers, and there might be who oversees these person-centered plans and works with the coordinators, and who's the one who does the actual discovery piece, and who does the job development piece. So I think, you will find that there are not necessarily rules of thumb about that you would in maybe other kinds of services about what the person looks like doing each of these jobs. It's kind of like you have to look at the whole function of the company to find out. And smaller organizations wouldn't have that level of infrastructure.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's a good point because my structure is very different than what Karen has said. Her structure is. We have employment mentors and they have responsibility. They operate at a very high level, but they also get in the dirt as well. So they do everything related to employment services and they are highly trained, but they do all the pieces of it.
Okay.
So the literature will tell you that in employment services, you have specialists or you have generalists.
Yep.
And the trend in the field is that it kind of flip-flops. You go from the people who meet you and take you all the way through to get a job and then support you once you have the job. And then there are people who are specialists along the way. There was a really good article written by the University of New Hampshire a long time ago when we just started talking about natural supports about what is the trend between specialists and generalists. And I will tell you, as an organization, I've worked there for 35 years. I have trended in and out. Right. So sometimes I have specialists, and sometimes, right now, we happen to have specialists. But a lot of people, like Karen says, has generalists.
So, not wanting to take us too far afield because we need to get to Stephanie's piece. What that argues for, and I'm not suggesting this is a policy position from DDA's perspective, but just what you just said, from a traditional rate setting perspective, would argue for differentiation in the rates because you have different models. Not saying that's where we're going directionally, but just that's what it argues for, because there's different approaches, and you want to reward and recognize different cost structures. So, with that, Stephanie, do you want to?
Sure. I will go through things quickly because it seems like we've had a lot of conversation that these slides we're going to talk about. So again, these slides are data that we collected from the State Employees Leadership Network.
One more, Dr. Small.
I'm sorry, Dr. Small.
Thank you.
Start with slide. Yeah. Okay. The State Employees Leadership Network employment app that they did a small sample within the state of Maryland. And SEEK was one, and this was some data that Ms. Lee had asked us to gather to kind of show the all the parts of employment services. It's also important to note that this data covers all of the employment spectrum, so pre-employment to include stabilization. So just to keep all that in mind as we look at. So the first slide.
This is the job coach app.
Yeah, job coach.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
it did not actually have the specialists. It had specialists. It did not have generalists. So it had mostly people who were working on frontline.
Yeah. I double checked the information with them, and it did say with SELN, and they did tell me it did start with pre. When they look at data, it did have something there for pre-employment as well. So the first slide identifies where services are taking place, where staff is. And I think we've talked a little bit about this in the transportation discussion already, but we wanted to see, so thinking about just follow along some of the places where staff is in some type of office setting, whether it be a home office or in the office, at a residential setting, business. So would we say that this kind of accurately reflects what you're seeing in your company or your day to day? And is there any other place they may do services that's not reflecting here? Next slide, please, Dr. Smalls. The next slide talks about the actual service, the actual work that staff is doing in order to help people get to their employment goals. So getting to know the person, finding and securing a job. Again, this is not just looking at what we would consider follow along supports, but the whole range. And then again, we note that about 1/3 is looking at administrative paperwork on here. Would you say that this is accurate? And I think you've already talked a little bit about what that paperwork looks like, what things they're doing, phone calls and things they're making. So that kind of goes through that discussion. Was there any comment? Okay. Next slide, Dr. Smalls.
Wait, can I ask you a question?
You
Do
may.
we know with the non-employment related EGJ programs, but is there any more information about that category? I guess it's not getting. Is that only the 3%? It's hard when everything's a shade of a different same color.
Yeah, the colors are kind of
it's like
close, aren't they?
3%.
But yeah, this 3% is
Okay,
the
so it's
3%.
not much. Okay,
Mhm.
all right.
I think it was like coordinating with the day programs.
Yeah.
Like,
So our next slide reflects the indirect support. I'm sorry, no, it doesn't. The next slide kind of reflects what we would expect to see and follow along, how much time the staff is spending with the person and other activities. So it kind of gives a look. So this slide indicates that the majority of the time, staff is 52% of the time here, the staff is directly working with the person.
So even though, as we highlighted, this came from a small group of participants that actually gave the data, this slide really speaks to the value in this data and that likely it is to some extent what's really happening in the field, because that's what we would expect to see more than half of the time spent with the individual.
I'll add too, just, in the scenario we were talking before about a specialist versus a generalist, I would expect to see a different chart for each of those.
Me too, that's what I'm
In
saying.
Karen's particular program, somebody doing 50% may make sense because some of those organizational activities are specific to the organization of the program are removed at a higher level, not here at the hands-on. Whereas in Karen Gilchrist's case, you may see it a little lower because they've got some of that administrative function in there. So I think there's value in making sure to look at these to figure out what type of structure.
So that was not a variable in the study. When this study was done, and they actually still do have this app, so we could ask if we wanted to do the app, but it was your employment services, and they had like a list of qualifications, and it would have fit generalist and specialist. So I don't actually know that they ever pulled it out separately that way. I think it was more employment as a whole.
And if this is something, a tool that we would like to look at in the future, Deputy Secretary, they will modify it to our state specific so that we can maybe extrapolate that data if we need to.
Quick question. When you say a small number of providers, how small is small?
It was like 7.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's
So
nationally. These are not
yes.
solely Maryland.
So these
This is Maryland.
This is Maryland.
This is Maryland.
So
They
7
all, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I mean, it's interesting because we just came out of a conversation where I'm simplifying grossly, but we're trying to figure out sort of is a 1 to 3 the right ratio on the indirect stuff. These data could be profoundly instructive, I would think, in informing that conversation. But on 7 providers, it's interesting data, but hardly dispositive.
Yeah, so the goal wasn't really to
I know.
look representative.
But I'm just wondering if we can make a nest for 2 birds here, right? So can we use these queries to begin to amass bigger data to inform the conversation about the directs and indirects?
Well, I think more than anything, their categories are best practice. That's where you can start, right? The categories that they have. And I actually think that the time that we did this, I had generalists. So I think because this was Rick and Abby, who were both generalists, they did what Karen's company does, which is they did all the way from the discovery piece and the follow along. They did everything.
All good. I just think it's a tool we have.
Right.
It's a framework we have.
Yeah.
Let's leverage on it.
I just want to go on and
No, go ahead.
just a question about the 7. Do we know? I know they weren't intended necessarily to be representational. Was there any geographic, like meaningful geographic, or did they tend to be kind of clustered in particular regions?
Someone else asked that question, and I'm gonna ask specifically and get back to the
Okay,
group.
great, thank you.
It's just voluntary who wanted to participate.
Yeah, but I think to Karen, your earlier comment, and I had the same questions, Laura. In terms of making sure that we get a representative sample to give us the information we need to inform policy discussions around rates.
Does it matter?
Sort of
I mean, if you're in, Somerset or Allegheny County versus Montgomery, Prince George's.
And for us, where we're tiptoeing into employment, I'm in Montgomery County, has nothing to do with geographic location, at least at that level. I'm at an earlier stage of this, and so I'm almost certainly going to have nothing but generalists. Whereas another provider who's farther along in the process. Exactly.
Well, it sounds like we have opportunity to work with SELN.
Yeah.
And so we could definitely build off of that opportunity to continue informing the conversation.
Who are your current SELN reps?
My pertaining to the app, or
No, the ones
no,
that
the one
currently
that I
work with.
meet with regularly. Stacy Jones and Janine.
Oh, Janine.
Okay.
Stacey doesn't know anything about Maryland.
And of course, John Butterworth, even though he's retired, peeks his head in.
Yeah.
A few times.
He's not really retired.
He's not really retired.
Kind of, sort of. kind of sort of a little bit. Yeah.
Because he kept Hawaii. Funny thing.
Yeah, he's not that.
Okay, I think I stopped on 17.
Yes.
Okay, 17 talks a little bit about the indirect services. And I think we've covered a lot of those. Again, it looks like a lot of more administrative type of activities. Again, knowing that it's looking at all employment services. So would we say that this is accurate or reflective of what you're seeing daily?
Was there anything there that we feel like we need
Yeah,
to
anything
add?
popping up at you? Anything missing? Because I see they separated out case notes. So one question I have was, what additional from case notes and reporting forms, what is the additional administrative things that staff do? I know we talked about calling Social Security.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, that the social security company.
Is that social?
It's consequential.
It is.
But can you multi that?
Oh, correct.
And this may be a moot point now, but in the past, I know Social Security had benefits people specifically for people with special needs. Is that
Yeah, no,
still
I
something?
don't think that that's a thing.
No.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna
No.
say. And finally, we didn't, of course, as usual, we looking at the data, and we talked about we might want to look at it even closer and maybe invest in SELing, because DDA would like to continue to make data-driven decisions when it comes to employment. So is there any other data you feel that was not represented in the previous slides that we should be looking at? Or that you would like to be added to? It's whether we use the app, if we choose to go that way, can be customized, but if we choose to go another way, we can, we'd like to know was anything, as you looked on the slides, any categories missing?
I know you're looking for an answer now. I wonder if you guys would indulge. I'd love to go back and meet with my team. But these are good questions, but to really dig in and sort of figure it all out so that we can give you informative answers. Rather than spitball.
Yeah. And so what we can do is you have these slides, we can provide the questions, again, that you can vet with your team members and come back and give us additional things to take into consideration.
That's awesome. Yeah. Look at the pie charts and well, any additional categories we should add that would be helpful. Put your chicken scratch on the slide and scan them back to us. Chicken scratch.
Well, I'm left-handed, mine is definitely chicken scratch. No,
Thank you,
mine
all.
is too. I know that's my thing. I don't know.
And we are going to move over.
Thank you, Steph.
You're welcome. To the general ledger.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kristen Deal at Hilltop. I think the face of the general ledger template.
Put your logo in the corner.
And so really just want to take the opportunity again today to talk about like the long-standing, work that we've been doing. Back in 2023, the DDA established the general ledger template as the data collection tool to support rates going forward. And there was a strong focus on ensuring adequate provider resources and technical assistance. The template provides a consistent mechanism for providers to submit cost data to be used as one source of data to review the adequacy of rates and ensure a data-driven recommendations. We are continuing to focus on training and technical assistance as we review the fiscal 24 templates that we received. We are always looking for your continued feedback and input on what training was most helpful, what additional resources are needed, and timing on technical assistance to ensure consistent and high quality data. So next slide, please. And so just to kind of go over some of the highlights, in terms of what we received from the fiscal 24 general ledger templates, we are still hovering at about 80% of providers who have submitted. We're continuing to work through that feedback. I think we have about 30% of the providers who submitted to continue to reach out to. We are sending the written feedback to all the providers, engaging in technical assistance calls, asking for clarifications and updates to be sent back so we can get as clean as data as we can for 24, and then really give the providers the information to ensure that the 25 data that we get is as clean as can be on that first submission. And so as we are focusing on 25, again, our goal really is to get 100% of the providers to submit for this year. We did open the discussion right here in this room in January for your feedback, input, and we're grateful for the opportunities that we've had to meet with different provider groups. We have gotten some great feedback. Internally, we're working behind the scenes to incorporate that feedback. The template will definitely look a little different next year. The cost data that we're looking for remains the same. The guidance will remain the same. But the look and feel hopefully will be a little more efficient based on the feedback that we've received. And then we're taking those topics that seem to be a little more challenging for providers, and we will create specific trainings around those particular topics. We'll record them, provide them, and then, of course, be available to continue to meet one-on-one as needed. But really to provide a robust efforts ahead of 25 to get as many providers to submit and to make it more efficient as we continue to move forward. So again, we just really appreciate all the time that you've taken to help us with this process. Continue to encourage you to keep reaching out to us at our dedicated email. I think all of you have my email, so please feel free to reach out to me anytime. And we really are looking forward to hitting that goal of 100% of providers submitting high quality data for fiscal 25.
Just curious, question for DDA. Did we ever get 100% of the cost, of course?
I don't know if Brianna is on or not. We can send an updated count.
I love the goal. I can tell you percent too, but
I can tell you it's not. You're talking about the cost of
old
reports
school
to the past.
history. Did we ever get 100?
Let's just say not on time. We eventually get them all, but not on time.
Can we see the new look template at some point?
Yeah, our goal is to be able to share it because we'll certainly want input and feedback. I think some, sneak peeks. We're going to try to use the provider tab to get information from the providers about the services that they deliver, and then have the tool populate just the tab, just what you will need to report on instead of the 28 tabs that it currently has. So it will be a more customized experience. And then as you're entering the cost data, there will be drop downs to help guide what goes in what area. And so you would be able to populate that. I think we're hoping that it can be a little more tailored to each provider. So it's a more streamlined process. You don't have to worry about services that you don't provide. If you're only in Rockford State, you're not going to see any of the geographic differential like blank cells. If you've only provided services in LTSS Maryland, you'll only see the LTSS Maryland cells, just to make it a little cleaner and hopefully easier to populate. But the goal would be to share it in May, hopefully ahead of the meeting, and we can have a discussion and get your guys' feedback.
Can I just ask a question only because it came up in the last couple of weeks? I think provider had gotten feedback from you all, and this issue came up that has been raised before, which is whether nursing and contracted nursing services, what category it goes in. Because I bet they were told to put it in the direct care category. Is that accurate?
So it would depend on the service and whether that's included as part of the service. And then if they are providing just the nursing service that's authorized as nursing service, then the nurses are the direct care.
Right, but I think I feel like they're saying in other services. So I can follow up with you.
Okay.
It definitely caused people were concerned
Question.
about
Okay.
nursing going in with direct support.
Okay, yep.
Okay.
Maybe I missed this, but are we gonna see the outcome of the 24 data?
We've done a little bit of looking. It's still very much in process in terms of like we put emails out to providers. We're still waiting to get templates back. So I think before we start doing any analysis, we want to make sure we've got the cleanest data that we can. And it's still a moving target, but once we feel like we're kind of at where we're going to land for the year, we'll do some analysis on what it looks like.
Do you have a estimate time frame?
I would say probably over the summer, like in advance of 25, but don't want to I want to overpromise.
In the future, when things get a little smoother here, how soon are you thinking that you'd be able to get analysis?
So the goal will be to get the templates at the end of September and be able to use that data for the upcoming rate cycle. So much quicker. We would have to have it ready and processed by January in order and able to use it to look at the priorities and dig into what the RIDE is going to focus on for the calendar year.
The dilemma that we have now is, well, we have 80%. Likely what's going to happen is the actual usable percentage of data is probably going to be down in the 30s. So that's why Kristen and her team are spending so much time now doing the legwork and having the conversations with Laura and the Max people and doing that, because not only do we have to get from 80, to near to 100 for submission, but more importantly, we actually have to improve the quality of the submissions. So that's the biggest challenge.
I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise. We knew the first year was going to be rough. I suspect the second year is going to be rough. It is so different, and people have found it incredibly challenging to complete. And you guys have been wonderful in terms of the support you've provided. All I hear is positive feedback when people get in touch with Hilltop, and I'm always telling people, the Hilltop, they'll be able to help you. But I think post feedback, there have been questions, and I know now that session's over, we're going to reconnect about how we might be able to help. So yeah, but yeah, it's definitely been a challenge for people.
Thank you, Kristen. Next slide, please. I want to thank you all for today's discussion, your input, your feedback, that we can take back as we plan for the next meeting. Before we pivot to the public comment session, are there any walk-on items? Okay, Dr. Smalls, we're ready for public comment.
Okay, so we have a number of questions that have been put into our chat. So I'm going to call your name out, and if you would unmute yourself, then you'll be able to ask, unless you want me to go ahead and just read people's comments. Robert, would you prefer me just reading the comments, questions?
Yes, I'm fine either way, Dr. Smalls, if you want to read them, but also if anyone wants to make a comment or ask a question, don't recall if they can raise their hand or not, so maybe they have
Yes.
to read them. Okay.
Okay, well, the first one I see here is from Rebecca. Okay, we're just asking about the presentation being made available. Yes, it will be added so that you can download it, be on the website, and the recording will be on our YouTube channel. Okay, our next question comes from Mary. If you're able to obtain a job, with increases in wages, does this disqualify you from services?
That's a great question because of the Medicaid work requirement.
What was the question?
If you were unable to find a job, does that disqualify you for waiver services?
Okay.
But they're not being applied to us yet, right?
I was gonna say, that's a question, yes, as to the threat of work requirements for Medicaid.
I would think that that's where it came from, but if there's clarification,
Currently, no.
Maryland does not have a work requirement.
That's exactly.
Current. What time is it?
Check your phone.
Listen to
Oh, no, they can do it whenever they,
Executive orders, all that. As dispensers these days.
your showers. Straight.
Can I just say one thing about this? We have gotten feedback, actually, that providers have been told by, I'm not sure if it's ADD or DDA, but somewhere from the department, communication has happened that if you're an EID, you lose your eligibility for the DDA waiver. And I've now heard it twice, which is really concerning.
Really wrong, too.
That just by being an EID, you lose your DDA waiver. Yeah, I know. So I just wanted to throw that in there since it's sort of adjacent to this.
That's some really good misinformation.
I was gonna say,
It really is, but I have to
be
tell
clear,
you,
that is
whoever-
really wrong, but.
I can't remember exactly who it came from. I'd have to look back at some notes, but I mean, I do know which provider it came from, but the department dug in and said, no, you're not eligible. And I was like, wait a minute, the whole point of EID, to maintain your waiver eligibility when you, so. Anyway.
It didn't have to do with retirement benefits?
Nope.
Okay.
No, I'm all over that issue. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Okay, there are a few other comments here about CCS's inability to articulate sometimes, so reinforcement of the need for additional training. Our next comment or question says, how do you maneuver number 4 when sometimes positions have to be customized to accommodate the needs of the person's disabilities?
Address that.
Yeah, we talked.
Yeah, I think what was said is you make that known that it was customized, but are they receiving the same rate of pay? Are they
Exactly.
Right.
working with the other coworkers? There's other things that would allow you to still qualify.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's important for individuals to recognize that when the regional office plan reviewers are looking at those CIE requirements, they're not looking at it through a magnifying glass to try to keep people out of jobs. It's just really to, from a reasonable perspective, is this meeting the criteria? Are we segregating people? Are we putting them in positions that unfairly discriminate, or not unfairly, discriminate them against the general population? So.
All right. There's generic comment about the the time of the meeting changing. We're now moving forward. The meetings will be going to 2 o'clock. So there's an extension of the meeting time to provide and support this fruitful conversation. The next question or comment said, would it be helpful to have a CMS rep in this group or committee? Is that possible?
No.
It would be nice, but they're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to talk.
Well, I want to be able to have these conversations
Yeah.
without feeling like
Agreed.
personally CMS is like,
Taking
if something needs to go to CMS, that's fine.
They can't even pick up their phone.
Well, let's pretend that
Literally
they could. I don't.
inviting Big
Yeah,
Brother to the table.
exactly.
Okay, the next question is, would you explain what it's,
We
sorry.
should add, though, that we are able and do on occasion schedule technical calls with CMS as needed. So if there was ever something we needed to seek clarification on, we have the ability to work with our Medicaid partners to schedule those technical calls.
Their absence, it gives us the ability to kind of hash it out before you do.
That's correct.
By the way, so thank you guys for spending the time in the meeting. It's been very, very helpful.
Okay, can someone explain what a time study is?
Okay. A time study is when you pick a certain date and time on the calendar or during the day, and you count the production, or if someone's supposed to be packing, how long it takes them to package something, or how long it takes them to do their tasks within a certain period of time. So whether it's hours, or if you want to look at a longer study and say how much how productive a person was during a week. So it's looking at a person's productivity during a certain denoted date and time.
It was primarily used for supplemental wage
Yeah.
rates, which
Yeah.
we don't.
Thank you. The next statement is from Michael. Budget language from the General Assembly says, further provided that DDA shall reinstate any dedicated hours it removed from an individual's plan in fiscal 2025 that would have been in compliance with this policy and for which the individual has a current need for dedicated hours. DDA shall reinstate the loss of any dedicated hours removed from the participant's plan in fiscal 25 if the person has a current need for dedicated hours. And it looks like it's cut off. So I don't know, Michael, if you're able to unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be great.
I think I know what the question is. I would just say that we are still waiting through the budget, working with the department, our DBM partners, and others to go through the language to develop the operational plan. And we'll be able to speak to that in the future using one of the opportunities that we may have, either the community webinar, the waiver advisory council, or something to that effect. So not really in a position to talk about how we'll be operationalizing the budget at this point for this particular meeting.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Our next question or comment is for clarification, is the CIE or Competitive Integrative Employment Policy finalized?
So there is a current competitive integrative employee policy that is in policy stat right now. And that is our current policy.
And we will be updating the link on the presentation. I believe it's broken, the PDF version. So Dr. Smalls will make sure you get the correct version so that the link to the policy is working.
Okay, I am scanning through. I don't see any new questions. Oh, here we go. If you're able to obtain a job with the increase in wages, does this disqualify you from services?
Have a look at you gotta look at your income
Yeah.
and and the EID
So
program.
that is a separate Medicaid process. And what you're hearing in the room is discussion about the employees, individuals with, oh gosh, I can't think of EID.
Employed
Employed
individuals.
Individuals with Disabilities program that is operated by the Maryland Medicaid Administration. When you talk about how much you make, your annual salary as compared to your eligibility for Medicaid.
Okay, well, I'm going through and it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. If someone has one, if you want to go ahead and drop it in the question section. We'll go ahead and answer that. Otherwise, looks like that's all we have for today. Okay, I don't see any new ones coming in. So that'll close the questions that were submitted out at this point. Thanks everyone for submitting those questions and comments.
Thank you,
I'll
Dr.
turn it.
Small. Next slide, please.
So we're gonna move forward with to talk about our next steps in adjournment. As you see here, our next meeting is in May. So we will definitely be getting our information out to the RREG members in advance of that meeting so that we can continue these great discussions. Next slide.
It's on a Wednesday and not a Thursday.
It is on a Wednesday and not a Thursday. This slide reflects the upcoming meeting dates. So as noted, the next meeting is Wednesday, May 28th, and then the following meetings, we go back to our Thursday schedule. Next slide, please. This slide allows you to click right to DDA's website so that you can see all of our rate review advisory group materials. Next slide. And again, we just want to thank everyone for those who came in person. Thank you for joining us here today in person, as well as all of the individuals who joined us online. Really, really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to meet with us today and help us look at our employment services from a systemic level. We're definitely looking forward to the additional conversation. For those items that we said we'll get back to you on, we'll definitely provide that information in advance of the next meeting so that it can help inform our conversation. Thank you, everybody, for all that you're doing, and again, for your participation with us.